Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Geopod. I'm your host in the woods. Today I want to start a new topic on this channel. I've wanting to implement this for a long time, and I feel that right now the time is right. And that is, I want to introduce some strategic breakdowns on this channel rather than mere analyses regarding the events that are going on within the geopolitical landscape today. So these strategic breakdowns will most likely revolve around solutions based upon some of the predicaments the geopolitical landscape and the international community as a whole are faced with right now. Kind of give you more of an insight into some of the theories and some of the solutions I've concocted over the years in regards to said problems. So the first topic or the first subject of such a breakdown, and the one I'm going to start today, is ways to counter Russia, more or less. I want to go over some strategies and tactics the international community, in particularly NATO and the United States, can employ as to counter Russia without direct military intervention. So before I'm going to outline these tactics and strategies, we have to understand what sustains Russia's war effort as of this moment in time. So Russia obviously has been sanctioned to the furthest extent possible. Its economy has suffered huge blows, as have its own production in relation to ammunition, weaponry, missiles, that sort of thing. Russia more and more is forced to rely upon its partners, its allies, particularly North Korea, China and Iran, in order to persist in its campaign in Ukraine and in order to compensate the staggering casualty ratios they faced thus far. So once we understand that Russia cannot persist its ongoing campaign without the direct support of these nations, then obviously it becomes of vital importance to us, the Western community, to target those allies simultaneously as we target Russia and as we support Ukraine in order to mitigate Russia's capability on the short, mid and long term. Now, the country, the ally of Russia that I want to focus on primarily in today's video is Iran. Yes, North Korea is the one that has sent over 12,000 troops to the front lines in order to support Russia. Yes, North Korea is the country which has a security pact with Russia as of this moment in time. However, it is in fact Iran that has proven to be most vital in Russia's ability to persist in its campaign. As of right now, Russia and Iran are cooperating across a myriad of industries and a myriad of spectrums. They are not just cooperating militarily, they're cooperating economically, they're cooperating technologically, they're cooperating politically, they're cooperating within the information space. Their cooperation and their partnership transcends the mere boundaries of military allegiance. So if we wish to counter Russia without direct military intervention, it becomes paramount that we focus more on parties such as Iran and mitigate their capabilities, their networks, their influence, meaning thereby we will effectively counter Russia on the mid and long term. Now, there's a myriad of ways in which we can counter Russia by addressing Iran. The first of which is to disrupt smuggling routes leading from Iran to Russia. You have to understand that as of this moment in time, Iran is the greatest sponsor, the greatest military sponsor Russia has. Yes, North Korea is the one that has dispatched troops to the front lines, but it is in fact Iran that has maintained or helped maintain Russia's stockpiles of weaponry and has even allowed Russia to create facilities to produce Iranian weaponry on their own soil. So this goes beyond Iran merely delivering these weapon systems to them. No, as of this moment in time, Russia is capable of manufacturing Iranian weapons on its own soil. So if we wish to counter that, we have to address the smuggling routes, which Iran and Russia have long maintained to and long adhered to in order to evade sanctions. Now, there's one particular route that's vital in this entire scheme, and that is the North-South Transport Corridor. Now, this corridor runs from Tehran all the way through the Caspian Sea, through Azerbaijan, through Russia, more or less unopposed, right? And Russia and Iran has relied on this transport corridor to provide Russia not just with weaponry, not just with sometimes over 1 million units of ammunition, consisting of not just artillery shells, but drones and even ballistic missiles. Not just that, but they also have delivered through the smuggling route weapon components that Russia can then use within their own facilities to manufacture these Iranian weapon systems. So if we wish to counter that, then obviously it becomes of vital importance to target these smuggling routes, to prevent clear transit along these corridors, and to make it a hell of a lot harder for Iran to transport these goods towards Russia. And obviously this countermeasure, let's say, needs to consist of multiple layers, and it needs to have multiple parties involved. Obviously, the US needs to have a strong presence within this scheme. I also see a big role for Israel, as I do for the Gulf states, potentially Iraq, although Iraq is more or less of a sensitive subject matter right now, given the division within their own ranks. So, yes, it really becomes of vital importance, not just for the United States, but for the entire Western community as a whole, to target these smuggling routes as to prevent Iran from sustaining Russia's capability to produce new weaponry at the rate that they are doing so far. Now, obviously, another tactic that we can employ, and that has already been employed by President Trump in recent days, is to further sanction Iran. We need to cripple Iran to the furthest extent possible, in every way, shape, or form. We need to cripple its influence. We need to cripple its proxy network. We need to cripple its capabilities, both militarily, politically, and militarily. So further sanctioning Iran, obviously, is albeit a straightforward one, can prove to be a very effective strategy. And that is something that I believe the Biden administration has lacked. They've more or less allowed Iran to recover from the harsh sanctioning it suffered in the past, thereby allowing it to exert more power across the region and sustain its proxy network to a higher degree than it could have done thus far, or in the past rather. Now, another tactic, and this is more of an economic one, and this requires some background information. So as I've said before, the cooperation between Russia and Iran doesn't merely address military issues. They also address political standpoints, economic wealth between the two countries. So as part of evading the sanctions imposed on Russia, the Russians have come up with multiple payment and banking systems, which still allows them to transition funds to multiple parties across the globe. Obviously, there's the BRICS initiatives that Russia's dramatically trying to expand. So these banking and payment systems are sort of like their answer to the heavy sanctions imposed on them and the limitations imposed on them by banking systems adhered to by the US and the Western world. So what we have seen over the last couple of years is that Russia and Iran have allowed each other to become part of these payment systems that they themselves have installed in order to evade said sanctions. So they're trying to booster these payment systems by forming allegiances economically, not just between themselves, but also between various other actors within the region, to allow them to make use of these payment systems as to further evade Western sanctions and still maintain some level of economic prosperity. So if we wish to fully limit the economic capabilities of both Iran and Russia, obviously it becomes paramount that we don't allow these systems to expand too much, so that they will be able to stand as a proper alternative in relation to the payment systems which have been sanctioned in the past. So obviously that is something that, as a greater whole in this strategy, you want to address as well. Now, as I've said before, Iran and Russia are cooperating within the information space. Now, what does that mean? Well, what this means is that Russia and Iran adhere to propaganda and indoctrination campaigns besmirching the Western world. If there's one ideology they share between them, it is that the Western world is the great adversary, it is the great evil, and they, rather than being great evil actors themselves, must be seen as liberators, must be seen as resistance towards this evil bloc. And Russia and Iran have cooperated quite extensively in this regard with each other. So obviously, the information space right now is an incredibly vital component to any warfare effort, especially relating to psychological warfare and the swaying of hearts and minds, let's say. So the Western world, in my opinion, has so far failed to properly counter this with their own information campaigns. And I believe that this is something there where there's a lot of improvement, where there's room for a lot of improvement in the future. Yes, we must counter information campaigns with information campaigns, using facts rather than propaganda, because let's be honest, the Russians and Iranians have made it quite easy for us to besmirch them, given their political posture and ideologies. So, yes, information campaigns must be installed, must be disseminated. One way in which we can go about it is accuse Iran of its complicity within Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Look, here we have a country that's so-called, that wants to be a cultural and political and military leader within the Middle East, yet it's complicit in an illegal invasion of a sovereign country. So yes, we must fight fire with fire to a certain extent, especially when it comes down to the information space. The advantage we have had, the Western world that is, have at our disposal, is that we can make use of actual facts rather than mere blatant indoctrination and propaganda. Now, another thing, and this counts for both economic purposes, military purposes, as well as political purposes, is that the US, and in particularly NATO, must look more towards their regional partners in order to obstruct Iran's political and military agenda. The US has been quite active in this regard. I mean, the Abraham Accord between Israel and the Arab states are a great example of this. But I believe NATO as a whole must be more active in this regard. I feel NATO hasn't really expanded into the Middle East as much as they maybe should have these past few years. And for good reason, I get that, because they're fighting a war on European soil for the first time in, well, half a century. So I do get that sentiment, but on the other hand, you must also look to the threats of tomorrow. And those threats will most certainly, or at the very least some of those threats, will most certainly emanate from the Middle East, in particularly those orchestrated by the Iranian regime. So you want to optimize your regional partners, you want to create long-lasting partnerships, not just economically, not just politically, but militarily as well. And the Abraham Accord stands as a great foundation for that. Israel is most definitely a partner that needs to be utilized more by NATO. I really think that NATO should increase their partnerships with Israel. Yes, obviously there's a lot of scrutiny regarding Israel given the ongoing Palestinian conflict. But you must look at your own objectives here, and Israel has proven to be an incredibly capable and resilient partner in that regard. Now, last but not least, when we're talking about Israel, like I said, is an incredibly strategic partner. Particularly militarily, right? They have been able to single-handedly degrade Iran's proxy network to, well, a devastating degree, I might add. Hamas has been rendered militarily incapable, more or less. It can no longer adhere to a military structure of command and control, to some sort of organizational hierarchy. They have been degraded to mere splinter cells of gangs and armed groups, rather than a paramilitary force that functions within a brigade system, let's say. So obviously, this is something that is not just for Israel, but also for Europe and its safety of great importance. Hezbollah has been degraded to a very far degree. They haven't been this weak in decades, and that stands as a great precedent for more to come. Iran's aerial defensive systems have been rendered completely obsolete and have been destroyed by Israeli aerial campaigns, making their nuclear facilities a sitting duck, more or less. And that is quite important given the fact that as of right now, Iran is enriching uranium at a faster rate than they've ever done before. Yes, I understand the 2003 fatwa of Supreme Leader Khamenei, but that is just a hoax in order to allow them to get to a certain level of enriched uranium so they can immediately reverse that fatwa. And at that point in time, they will already have the capability to get a nuclear weapon within the span of mere months. So I don't put any merit on the fatwa. I see the fatwa for what it is, a decoy, something to appease the international community, but it should in no way, shape or form be taken seriously. No, Iran wants a nuclear weapon, and Iran will seek to achieve that whenever they deem the moment is right. So by allowing Israel in cooperation with your regional partners, to further dwindle Iran's military capabilities and those of its proxy networks. What this elicits is you force Iran to put more emphasis on their own security posture rather than that of their allies. They won't be able to send the weaponry they have to the amount of weapons they have done thus far, the amount of weapon components they have done thus far to a country such as Russia, if they have an existential crisis within their own military industries. So by countering Iran, by weakening Iran, you weaken Russia militarily, politically, and economically. And that is something that the Western world needs to understand. This isn't just Russia anymore. Yes, Russia was isolated for a long time, is still relatively isolated. But Russia is fighting an existential war to a certain degree as well. They understand that failure actually is not an option for them at this point in time, meaning they will do whatever they need to do to uphold some sort of front against the Western world, the United States and NATO. And one of the ways in which they have gone about this is to increase ties with their allies, such as North Korea, which they already have a security pact with, and now Iran, which they don't yet have a security pact with. It will be a little bit more difficult for them to get there, but hey, it might happen. And thereby they will further strengthen their own posture, not just along the front lines, but within the geopolitical landscape as a whole. So it is of great importance for NATO and the United States to counter any alliances that Russia makes to the furthest extent possible, not just militarily, but also economically, politically, and within the information space. So these are just some of my theories as to how the Western world, NATO and the United States can go about countering Russia without active military involvement. I thank you very much for listening to this clip. I hope to do more strategic breakdowns for you guys in the future. If you have any questions or comments for me, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. You can also reach out to me directly on one of my multiple social media platforms, and I will seek to look back to you, to get back at you as soon as possible. Once again, thank you very much for listening to this clip, and hope to see you all again next time. Have a good day. Thank you.